Dear listener, before the story begins, I ask you to subscribe to my channel. This is the best motivation at the start. And we are starting. The sun shone brightly on that autumn day, but its warmth no longer filled the air. After tending to his home's yard, he settled onto a bench to rest, his mind wandering. He was so lost in thought that he failed to notice when the neighbor's cat approached him. The feline stretched lazily and curled up at his feet. As he stroked the cat's fur, he remarked, "Hello there, my friend. You must also sense the impending arrival of autumn. Look, the leaves on the trees have already transformed into a myriad of colors, and the air has begun to carry the scent of fall. The aroma of summer has faded, replaced by the faint, acrid hint of burning leaves." He paused, gazing intently into the cat's eyes as if it comprehended his words. Then he continued, "It's been quite some time since our last encounter, likely about a year. We last saw each other before I departed for the capital, seeking a better life. In that span, you've grown from a tiny kitten into a mature cat. You know, I'm even a tad jealous of your carefree existence. All you need to do is eat, roam with the female cats, and catch mice. That's essentially your entire life. Moreover, you don't even truly need to hunt, as your owner will always provide for you." As he spoke, he gently petted the cat, which listened attentively as if grasping every word. It's said that animals understand everything, they simply lack the ability to speak. He continued sharing with his new listener, "My life could have taken a different path too, and I wouldn't have had to come back to my hometown. I deeply love my city, but there's nothing left to do here now unless you're connected to those in power or import food products," he said. The cat responded with an intent gaze. "I think I'm finished with work for today, so I'll sit with you for a bit and share my story, the tale of my love," he said. And thus began his narrative. In the summer of 2019, he relocated to the capital to live and work. As someone who had spent 35 years in his hometown, this choice was not an easy one. He arrived in the big city with several interview invitations in his portfolio, but there was only one engineering firm where he truly desired to work. The interviews went smoothly, and after successfully navigating multiple rounds, he secured a position at that company. Naturally, anyone changing their city and work environment will experience a degree of discomfort, but given time, one adapts to everything. It took him roughly 3 months to acclimate to the new surroundings, after which he felt at ease within the new team. It seemed to him then that the capital had embraced him. In his view, his adaptation period passed so swiftly because his sister resided there with her family, and he stayed with them for the initial 3 months. There was no time for boredom. On weekends, they would assemble a large group of fellow immigrants, and the question of how to occupy themselves never arose. They enjoyed picnics, boisterous feasts, and excursions out of town. All of this was wonderful, but eventually, his loneliness made itself known. At first, he didn't dwell on it, fully immersing himself in work. But later, this issue began to gnaw at him. He initially attempted to resolve this problem using social networks and dating sites. The number of profiles he perused was daunting to recall. Of course, life in the big city was different, and the expectations of the local girls were entirely foreign to him as a 35-year-old man. The requirements were the same as if he had lived there his entire life. None of them cared that there was an ongoing conflict in his home region, with people losing their lives and immigrants being compelled to abandon their warm homes in pursuit of a better life. He could write and talk at length about the subject of war. But this story is about something else, so let's proceed. After thoroughly exploring the dating sites, he went on approximately 10 dates. Unfortunately, none of the options suited him. One encounter in a restaurant was particularly memorable, as he recalls it was Sunday, February 16th. Early the following morning, he had a business trip planned with his boss. They had connected on a dating site the previous day. Her manner of communication captivated him. Unlike other girls, she didn't immediately inquire about his place of employment or the size of his salary and living space. Yes, those sizes were more of a priority than others now. They enjoyed a pleasant chat on the phone and agreed to meet the next day. To avoid dragging this out, I'll say the meeting took place. But in the end, he regretted the wasted time. After consuming a bottle of wine, she revealed her true nature. She turned out to be from the suburbs but harbored lofty ambitions in life. He remembers her words now. "A man must possess real estate. He needs to have at least some property." To his light-hearted remark, Do you consider a garage downtown to be real estate? She reacted unnaturally. At first she was confused, then began interrogating him about his achievements over the past 35 years. He managed to evade answering in a humorous way, not wanting to upset her prematurely. After that, thoughts swirled in his head about how to settle the check quickly and get home, since he had to rise at 3 a.m. the next day for a business trip. He no longer desired any interaction with this person. After paying the bill, he summoned a taxi. Upon stepping outside, she lit a cigarette and began sending unambiguous hints about going to his place. At that time, he was renting a one-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood and could afford such a trip. But after their conversation, any desire to have anything to do with this woman had vanished. They silently entered the taxi, drove up to her entrance. She exited, and they never met again. Following this encounter, he spent the night deep in thought and then slept the entire way to the other city. His boss was the same age, and they informally addressed each other using the casual you form. The boss inquired why he was so sleepy, to which he replied that he had gone on a date with a girl, but the meeting went poorly. In response, the boss said, "You still should have dragged that chick into bed," after which they both laughed heartily. I'll say that he began to lose hope of finding his other half. Thoughts swirled in his head about living for himself, but at the same time, he was bothered by the desire to give his parents a grandchild. These thoughts haunted him, and so it continued until quarantine hit. Most office workers switched to remote work. His usual work routine changed. Business trips disappeared, and he spent all his working hours on the phone and computer. The days and evenings seemed endless. He saw family and friends more often on weekends, but spent most of his time working and alone. On one of those evenings, he remembered his old friend. She had also moved from their hometown to the capital a year earlier than him, and in peaceful times, they were friends and had a great time together. He doesn't know why, but things never progressed beyond the friend zone for them. He quickly found her number and dialed. After a few seconds, he heard the already familiar voice on the line. "Well, hello, stranger. How are you?" she said cheerfully. "I'm great, slowly making it through quarantine. How about you?" he replied, and they started talking. He remembers their conversation lasting well past midnight. Neither of them wanted to hang up, although they were probably both sleepy. As a result of the call, they agreed to meet in about a week at her place in a neighborhood by the river and take a stroll along the embankment. The week flew by unnoticed. On Friday, he took a taxi to her area, since the subway wasn't operating due to quarantine, so everyone used road transport, and the city was stuck in huge traffic jams. It took him 3.5 hours to cover the 8 miles from his neighborhood to hers. But the desire to see her overshadowed all these unpleasant moments. When he saw her, he immediately smiled, because almost her entire face, except her eyes, was covered by a mask, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. But at the same time, she was simultaneously cute and funny. They walked along the beautiful river embankment and in a new nearby park. They bought coffee at the only open street cafe. Time flew by very quickly. She mentioned that she had broken up with her boyfriend quite recently and was just taking a break from relationships now. He told her about his recent online dating experience. Time passed unnoticed. After the walk, he accompanied her home and went back to his place. All week, they called each other several times a day. They always had something to tell each other. A couple of weeks later, they met again and once more walked around the city. At one point, it seemed to him that he had found his person, and it was extremely important not to lose her now. That barrier of the friend zone from the beginning of their acquaintance had become an impenetrable glass. He could see her, but like an 18-year-old boy, he couldn't bring himself to touch her. He admits that by that time, he had been with plenty of women in his life, but with her, he was shy for some reason. He was probably afraid of ruining the rapport they had. He spent his free time thinking about her day and night, as well as about his own cowardice and indecisiveness, which made him even more angry. And so it continued for some time. One day in May, they agreed to go on a picnic. She said she knew some cozy and secluded spots on the river embankment where they could sit and have tea or something stronger. That's when he realized this was his chance to move from thoughts to action. That evening, he bought a couple of bottles of good champagne, as well as strawberries and chocolate, and rushed to her neighborhood. When they met up, they walked along the embankment, and she said it wasn't far, about half a mile. Soon they arrived at the spot. It was a truly secluded oasis. Soft river sand was underfoot, small thickets of bushes behind them, and the wide, mighty river flowed directly in front of them. The spot had a stunning view of the evening embankment. She spread out a blanket, and they sat down. Then he filled the champagne glasses and they started talking. During the conversation, they jumped from topic to topic. They took a couple of photos with the beautiful view in the background and continued chatting. In the midst of talking, they didn't notice how it got dark, and a full moon rose in the sky. The view was simply magical. They sat on the blanket while the evening embankment was visible in front of them. At one point, he looked into her beautiful eyes. The moon reflected in them. And then he felt that the moment had come. He touched his lips to her lips. A second later, he repeated it, but this time gently kissed her, feeling the warmth and softness of her lips. In that moment, he realized there could be misunderstanding on her part, that there was no going back, but that concerned him the least then. He kissed and embraced this girl who seemed made to be his. After the kiss, she said, "What was that?" He replied, "I don't know, but I'm sure it's something I should have done long ago, back in 2011 when we first met." After those words, he pulled her to him, and the kiss was repeated. He doesn't remember now how long it lasted, but they were alerted by an approaching rustle. A second later, a stray dog jumped out of the bushes. It ran up to them, wagging its tail and circling near their blanket. "Buddy, we have nothing to give you except chocolate," he said. She replied, "It's known that sweets are bad for dogs, but let's give him a small piece of chocolate anyway. Let him enjoy it." Then she took a small piece of chocolate and gave it to the dog, who instantly gulped it down. After that, they gathered their blanket and went for a walk along the embankment. He remembers them talking about many things, but making no promises to each other. After the walk, he took her home, called a taxi, and went back to his place. Arriving home, he called her, and they chatted a bit more. In their conversation, they tried to avoid the topic of them, as they couldn't understand what had happened by the river. They talked for about 20 minutes, wished each other good night, and hung up. When he fell on the bed, he began replaying the moment of the kiss like a recording, feeling anew the tenderness and warmth of her lips. It made him feel warm and joyful inside, but somewhere deep down, he understood the fragility of this moment, which upset him a little. Trying not to fall into a deep analysis of what happened, so as not to get too upset, he closed his eyes and quickly fell asleep. In the morning, he woke up to his alarm. The clock showed 7 a.m. He quickly got up, drank a glass of water, and went out for a morning run. He liked to contemplate while running, as it seemed to improve overall blood circulation, and his brain worked better. Recalling yesterday's events, he first felt ashamed for some reason, as if he had ruined a friendship. But that thought was quickly replaced by the conviction that he should have taken the first step long ago and had done the right thing, albeit belatedly. In the middle of the week, he and the other employees of his company were called into the office. They were told that although they were officially on unpaid leave, they still had to work. The bosses suggested they come in for a full workday, but unofficially. It would be fine, except as a sales manager, he needed to travel to industrial enterprises all over the country. Considering there was a strict quarantine nationwide, every outing had to have a clear legal basis. By law, only trips to stores and pharmacies were allowed, and here they were suggesting he drive around to factories and plants, risking his health without any guarantees. In general, despite all the perks of working at this company, he decided to quit. He had the opportunity to look for a new job for some time, which he did. Despite the quarantine, job search sites were full of vacancies, but the proposed salaries were miserly. The amount offered would barely cover rent, and that's for a full workday, not including food and transportation. And here he had been dreaming about his personal life. Days and weeks flew by. He and she communicated by phone as if nothing had happened. She supported and motivated him in every way in his job search, while categorically recommending he not return to his hometown. At one point she told him, "You need to take any job just to stay here." But he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to work just to pay for an apartment, especially since at that time he was offered a remote content manager position. Considering it was remote work, he could easily do it from his own apartment back home. In the end, he returned to his hometown, but they didn't stop communicating. That's how it goes. The man finished his story. The cat was peacefully sleeping at his feet. The clock already showed 4 p.m. He gently placed the cat on the bench and was about to leave when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Picking up, he heard an unfamiliar female voice. It was an HR rep from one of the companies with foreign investments where he had sent his resume. She invited him for an interview in just 3 days. He successfully passed the interview and was hired. He and she now live together and are planning their bright future together. That's how it happens sometimes, when circumstances don't go your way, and it seems there's no hope left. A ray of light appears in your life, and it starts bubbling again.